Wow, that second verse of that song, it reminds all of us back what we studied in chapter 4. That's where that second verse of Holy, Holy was based. Casting down their golden crowns, and that's what the 24 living elders did, and the cherubim and seraphim falling down before God. Truly amazing. I got a text from a man today, and I decided to just pick the phone up and call him, a Christian brother, actually a brother who was a minister for a short period of time, and we were just talking about common experiences and where our lives have intersect with people that we know in the past, and it was a wonderful conversation with this good Christian brother, and hopefully you will get to meet him here soon. But towards the end of the conversation, and this doesn't maybe really have anything to do with tonight, but then again it does. It just always does. He said, so I have some questions, but he said, I don't want to take up any of your time. And I said, brother, I have plenty of time. If I don't have it now, I've got it some other time. You find me and I'll make it happen. And he said, well, just one while we're on the phone. He said, my wife and I have been studying eschatology. And he said, we have a view, we have a belief that Christ returns at the end of the tribulation period, and that's when the rapture happens, and that's not what he had believed earlier. And he said, this is our belief now. But he said, but we also have been taught and have a belief in the imminent return of Christ. And as soon as he said that, I said, brother, I know exactly where you're going. I said, if you don't mind, I'll stop you right there. And let me show you how this works and how this isn't that difficult. Just have to open your mind and start processing 1, 2, 3, 4. I said, so what do you mean when you say imminent or imminency? imminency. What do you mean by the imminent return of Christ? And of course, I know what he's going to say, but I want him to see what he's going to say. And he said, well, that means that Christ can return at any moment. And I said, okay, I agree. I said, that's what I wanted you to say, and that's what I thought you would say. So does that mean he can return tomorrow? Or what about Saturday or Sunday or Wednesday of next week? That would be any day, that he could return any day. And I said, before you answer that, I said, let me ask you some other questions. Didn't Jesus say to Peter, didn't he predict in the last chapter of John how Peter's death and how it would occur as an old man? Didn't he tell Paul, you must testify before me in Rome? If he told him that, then could he have come back the next day after he told Paul that you must testify me in Rome? Didn't he tell the disciples, tarry in Jerusalem until you be endued with power on high? So could he, we know he ascended in Acts 1, like verse 11. Could he have come back the next day? That would be imminency. Or the next day, or the next day. Didn't he say to them, you're going to be my disciples in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth? If he had come back the day after he said that, then none of that would have been fulfilled. So I said, so when did this doctrine of imminency, when did that become a truth? How far back do you go? He said, well, I thought we would go back to the New Testament. And he said, but I see all the problems that your questions are causing. And I said, yeah, they do. So I said, here's the thing, brother, and so this does kind of fit in tonight. It fits in with anything that we study in the Bible. I said, here's the situation. This is the word of the living God who possesses all wisdom and all knowledge. There are no contradictions here. The contradictions are in our own mind. They're never in Scripture. So if you think you have teaching that says the second advent happens at the end of the tribulation, which it will and does say and will happen in Revelation 19, then that means those passages that you have looked at and that you're familiar with that talk about the Lord is going to return soon and he's going to come as a thief in the night. And I said, that must mean those were not properly interpreted. I said one or the other. I said either the first one is not right or the second one, they can't both. Now maybe they're both wrong, but they can't both be right. And so he got the point right away. And it was, I think, very helpful for him. It's been helpful for me to process any things in the Bible like that, because I grew up hearing the Lord can return at any moment. No, he can't. Paul says in 2 Thessalonians 2, that day will not happen until there come a falling away first and the man of sin be revealed. I mean, it gives you two things. That day can happen, Second Advent, until at least these two things happen. And we've looked at a lot of things in Revelation that have to happen, including, if you're with me here in chapter 7 now, the sealing of this 144,000. So, in looking at these different arguments, and there are arguments and objections to the ethnicity of these people being Jewish, that's where we were last time, the ethnicity of these people. There are lots of different arguments. I can't help, as I look at all these and then walk away from them and process, what is it they're saying? I can't help but see this to be their argument. What they say is, these can't be Jewish people, because if they are, then they would be Jewish people, and we can't have that. That's basically what their whole argument is. These cannot be Jewish. And I've said that to you before. They come to this with a system in place, with a theological doctrinal system that simply won't allow this. So that when they get here, they arrive with baggage. And literally, you can reduce everything to this argument of theirs. These can't be Jewish people, because if they are, then they'd be Jewish people, and we can't have that. That's really what they're saying. If you can eliminate, if they can eliminate all the passages that don't fit their system, then there are no passages that contradict their system. It's as simple as that. So why is it people are so fussy over these being Jewish people? How can they possibly, it says in verse 4b of Revelation 7, they're from all the tribes of the children of Israel, and then it goes on to list 12 of those tribes in verses 5 to 8. How can they possibly object to the Jewishness of this group? Well, there are little subtle reasons, and all the reasons spring from their different theories. But tonight, we have some really interesting things to study tonight, and then we will continue next go around. I'm going to look at just a couple of the most common objections, and you're going to find this, I hope, really fascinating and really interesting, and hopefully educational, and hopefully grasp some other things happening and beliefs out there in the world, as well as have a better understanding of the Bible. So let's look at a couple. We'll only get through one of these tonight. Common objections to the Jewishness, the Jewish ethnicity of these people. And I know you're probably still looking at it saying, well, how can you get around the fact that they're Jewish? Well, as I'm showing you, people have ways, they have invented ways to get around it. And here is by far the biggest one and the best known one, and that is what we will call, or what they have called, the 10 lost tribes theory. This is very important and very widespread. The 10 lost tribes theory. Now, I don't want to talk underneath anyone. I want to try to not make this simplistic, but make it simple. There's a big difference, and make it easy to understand. So where do we even get tribes? What's the whole business about tribes? So let's just, for a couple of moments, just walk through that. In the end of Genesis 11, God called a man named Abram, who lived in an area that's occupied by present-day Iraq. He was a pagan. He was a heathen. He was not a believer in God. We're told that he and his family worshiped other gods. God appeared to that man and called him and told him, I want you to obey me, and I'm going to make a great nation of you and bless all the people of the earth through you. This is the absolute election and sovereignty of God. There might have been better people in the world at that time, who knows? But we know this was not a good man. He was definitely a heathen. But God just chose him and appeared to him, and his name was Abram. And he said, I want you to leave this area and obey me, and I'm going to give you what we call now the promised land. So Abraham journeyed to this promised land. Abraham had a son whose name was Isaac. Isaac had a son whose name was Jacob. And all along, God has said, if you look at the first couple of verses in Genesis 12, I'll bless those that bless you, I'll curse those that curse you, and in you will all nations of the earth be blessed. And if you read the rest of the narrative of Genesis, you see Genesis 12:3 being fulfilled. That when Abram, and later he became Abraham, when he and Sarah went before Abimelech and then went before the king of Egypt, and those two foreign leaders tried to take Sarah to be their wife, God punished them. Anytime anyone tried to do any harm to Abraham or to his descendants in this book, God was always working against those people. You see it in the case of Jacob, you see it in the case of Isaac, you definitely see it in the case of Joseph, you see it in all of these people. So we go from Abraham to Isaac. He had a son, Jacob, and Jacob had 12 sons. This is the origin. I know this is very elementary, but this is the origin of, not the 10 tribes, we're going to get to that, to 12 tribes. He had 12 sons. They're listed in the last half of the book of Genesis in the order of their birth. Now let's jump ahead. Hold that thought for a moment. Let's just jump ahead. So they go to Egypt. God delivers them from Egypt. They wander through the wilderness. Moses dies. Joshua is his successor. They go into the promised land. The land is divided up by sacred lot. Each of the tribes is given their tribal allotment. Joshua dies, and all the elders that outlived Joshua died. And then the nation of Israel goes into a certain level of apostasy after that. The last of the judges was a man by the name of Samuel, who was also a prophet. The people have experienced all kinds of setbacks due to the fact that there are people in the land, Canaanites, Amorites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Jebusites, all the ites, that were thorn in their side that they couldn't overcome, and they needed leadership. And they came to Samuel and said, we want a king like all these other people around us have. Samuel said, well, let me warn you. Here's what normally happens with a monarchy. Once you put one person, like a king, at the top, and he has all of this power and authority, he's going to severely tax everyone to maintain his lifestyle. He's going to take your vineyards. He's going to take your flocks. He's going to take your herds. He's going to take your women for his concubines. That's what he's going to do. People said, we don't care. We want a king. Samuel went before God and cried before God. This is what the people want. And God told Samuel, they haven't rejected you. They have rejected me. But I'll give them a king. Hold on, we're coming to the 10 tribes. And so he gave them Saul. Saul ruled for 40 years. Saul was a handsome, strapping, powerful man, just the man you would pick if you were going by appearance, but he had an evil heart. So he didn't obey God. God removed him, and God raised up the next king, David, who was a man after his own heart, who became a type of Christ, a messianic figure. David reigned for 40 years. When David got old and he was going to die, then he had a son named Solomon. With me so far, all the way from Abraham, Saul, David, Solomon. Here's where we come into our situation. Whenever Solomon dies, now look, there's all kinds of information you have to read between the lines in the historical Old Testament books to see that there is festering all kinds of problems in the nation of Israel between clans and tribes and families. It is festering everywhere. It's not like Solomon died and everything just fell apart. There was a lot going on underneath the surface. But whenever Solomon died, his son Rehoboam remained king in Jerusalem, but Jeroboam, who was an opponent of Rehoboam, took over the northern part of Israel and became the king there, and the people wanted that to be. So at that time, you end up with two kingdoms. You don't need to remember names, Jeroboam and Rehoboam. You just need to remember there's the northern kingdom of Israel, and there is the southern kingdom of Judah. This happens in 931 BC. Israel is now a divided nation. You still have 12 tribes, but they are divided with however many tribes you want to put. Most people say 10. They ought to think about that in the north, and then Judah and Benjamin, 2 tribes in the south.
Each side had their own king.
Each side had their own king, and there was a more or less a boundary line between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom, all of this is recorded in Kings and in Chronicles. They had 0 righteous kings in the whole 200-year history of the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom had a lot of evil kings, but they had a few good ones, like Asa and Jehoshaphat and Hezekiah and Josiah. They had some good kings. None as good as King David. But they had a few good ones, mostly bad, no good ones, all bad. So for the next couple of hundred years, remember the kingdom divided in 931 years before Christ, 931 BC, the kingdom divided. So for the next couple of hundred years, God sent prophets to the northern kingdom. People like Isaiah and Hosea and Amos were some of the prophets that prophesied to the northern kingdom, warning them of their sin, promising that if you don't reform yourself and return to the Lord, bad things are waiting for you. They did not listen. They did not respond. And here's where we're coming upon this 10 lost tribes business. This is a pivotal date in Old Testament history. In 722 BC, Assyria, which was a kingdom that again is in the area of where northern Iraq and western Iran is today. Assyria was the dominant power of the world of that day. They had various kings, Tiglath-Pileser, Shalmaneser, Sargon, and Sennacherib were the 4 kings in that order. And they're all mentioned in the Old Testament. The Bible wasn't just a book dropped down from heaven that has no context. You know, it has a context to the events happening when this person lived or this book was being written. So in 722 BC, without giving you all of the other historical background, the northern kingdom fell to Assyria. So they lasted from 931, 200 years, to 722 BC. They went away. This was the policy of the Assyrians. They went away into captivity, and the Assyrians would take people from other lands they had conquered and transplant them back to the northern kingdom. And the reason they did that is to discombobulate everything and everyone where there's no more loyalties, there's no more people connected. So you could never have an uprising of like-minded people come against the authority of Assyria. It was a very ingenious idea that they did. They took all the people, most of the people from, not all, most of the people from the northern kingdom to Assyria. And in Assyria, they assimilated them into their society by intermarriage, by introducing their own religion, their own practices, their own cultures, their own dress, their own foods, just to try to wipe out the identity of those people and make them become Assyrians. With that in mind, look over in 2 Kings 17. The first 6 verses tell you, in 6 verses, everything that I've been trying to explain to you. You'll find it here. This is the historical backdrop to what's going on. And as we're going to work our way into this 10 lost tribes theory, as you could probably guess already, the theory is that these 10 tribes, the northern kingdom, went into Assyria and disappeared. Hence the 10 lost tribes. That's where we're going with this. That's the theory. That is far from historically or biblically accurate, but that is the theory. So here in 2 Kings 17, let's look at verse 1. In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, southern kingdom, began Hoshea, that's the last king of the northern kingdom. He began to reign. He did that which was evil. Verse 3, then came against him Shalmaneser. This is Shalmaneser the fifth, who is the son of Tiglath-Pileser III, who is king of Assyria. Hoshea became his servant and gave him presents. That's the way they would often normally do it. They would subjugate the nation, and they'd rather just keep them under their thumb and receive taxation from them. But whenever this king that they've subjugated decides to, I think I might rebel, then they have to come back. That's what happened with the southern kingdom a couple of hundred years later. The king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria. In other words, he was not paying the tribute that had been levied on him by the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land and went up to Samaria, which was the capital city of the northern kingdom, and besieged it 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Halah and in Habor and by the river Gozan and in the cities of the Medes. Okay, so that forms a historical backdrop to the collapse of the northern kingdom and to a loss of a part of the population of the promised land. So this 10 lost tribes theory is very widespread. By the way, have any of you heard of it?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
It is very widespread. It's taken many, many forms. But again, as I back away from all this and look at it and ponder it, as you follow down the path of this theory, you end up with a surprise. If somebody told me that there are 10 lost tribes and they called them the lost tribes, you know what I would think? I think, well, those tribes are lost. They're gone. If you're lost, you can't be found. You're gone. No, that's not exactly what they mean. They put that name to it, and then as you follow down the rabbit hole of their theory, they say, you know how we told you that 10 of the tribes were taken to Assyria and they were lost? And you go, yeah, I remember you telling me that. They say, well, they weren't really lost. And you say, why not? And they say, because we are them. We are them. Yes, they all do exactly the same thing, no matter which form of this 10 tribe theory a person takes. You know, it's interesting. It's almost as though people know intuitively of the importance of the Jewish tribes and of the 144,000 in Revelation 7. Because the whole time they're fighting against the reality of any of that, they're trying to make themselves be that.
Versus just saying it's not true and we don't care or don't know who those people are. They want those people to be them.
I'm telling you, it's like intuitively they know. They see those 144,000, they got a special mark on their head. You know, if I can't be them, can I be somebody like them? Yeah. So last week, what? The church is spiritual Israel. Well, if we can't be Israel, can we be spiritual Israel then? It's like they intuitively know. And so there are even people who will agree with you when you say, now the 144,000 in Revelation 7 are Jewish. They will agree with you on that. But because they know intuitively there's something special about those people, they will say, well, we're Gentiles, so we can't be them, but we can be the 144,000 in chapter 14. See, they have two different groups of 104. We know we can't, we've got to be intellectually honest here and upright. We know I'm not a Jew, I'm a Gentile. I'm Mike Smith, a Gentile. So I know I can't be the one in chapter 7. Let me be the one over there in chapter 14. 10 lost tribes, they're the same way. The people who hold this theory. They go, wait, yeah, they're lost, but no, they really aren't lost because we are them. So let me give you some examples, and we're headed toward one particular example of the 10 lost tribes, but I'm telling you, I am just skimming the surface. This is not my expertise at all. You could find in the library big volumes. I saw one that I found the other day, $127 for this volume that's going to trace the history for this particular clan or group or religious sect of the 10 lost tribes. So, I mean, there is so much folklore involved in this. I've always called it's pseudo-geography, it's pseudo-anthropology, it's pseudo-history, it's pseudo-everything. But there is a big network of beliefs out there, and when you get into these, you see that there are hidden pockets of people, and there are secret identities, and some of these can be found maybe on the eastern seaboard shores of the United States when you uncover a monument and it dates back 200 or 300 years, and you see certain inscriptions on that. People have spent years, these theories go back several centuries in time, various forms of 10 lost tribes. Well, like I say, I'm just scratching the surface of this. I'm really only going to look at one in particular. But some people believe, this is not one of the ones we're going to study in any detail, some people believe that the people that live on the islands of Japan are the 10 lost tribes. All Japanese people came from the northern kingdom. They are the 10 lost tribes. There are other people that say there's a group in India. There are a lot of other people who say there are people, subgroups within Pakistan and Afghanistan, which would be more likely that you migrated from there, not all the way to the islands of Japan. But anyway, that the people there are the 10 lost tribes. So there are all kinds of theories about this, and they are fascinating. But I'm just going to give you three, and we're going to spend a little time with the third one. So the first, and if you haven't heard this, you just haven't been out there in reading. Guess what all of the black people in the United States are? They are the 10 lost tribes. So this has been a theory for a long time. They actually, and the ones who hold it strongly, who are black people in this country and believe it with all their heart, call themselves Black Hebrew Jews. That's what they are. They are Black Hebrew Jews. So again, the theory is you've got the land of Israel here, and you've got people that were deported to Assyria. Then once they got to Assyria, then what happened? Part of the theory, there are all types of elements to this, is that everyone was taken, and that's not true. The Bible is going to contradict that everyone was taken, and then once they got there, then everybody migrated somewhere else. And so the Japanese, some of them want to be the people, the Indians, the Afghans, the Pakistans, the Africans, the blacks, everybody. What I say earlier, everybody wants to be a Jew, even though they hate the Jews. I find it so interesting that anti-Semitism is a very prevalent feeling, and it has been for hundreds of years. People hate the Jews, and yet they cannot wait to become a Jew by making themselves one of these 10 lost tribes. So they believe, the Black Hebrew Jews, that from Assyria, these people migrated through Egypt to the west coast of Africa, and then became the commodity of human trafficking, the slaves that were bought and sold and shipped over to America. And that the origin of the black people in America from West Africa actually is traced back to Assyria and to the 10 lost tribes. Another group that is maybe better known by you, and they are called the Aryan Nation. That's a very dangerous group up in the Pacific Northwest. And they spike and simmer, they rise and fall, just depends on current government of America. They say patriotic, but they're very anti-government, they're very anti-Semitic, they're very anti-black. They call themselves the Aryan nation, and who do they think they have descended from? From the 10 lost tribes of Israel. It's absolutely fascinating that something we're reading about here in 2 Kings chapter 17, verses 1 to 6, could have the far-reaching ramifications that it does today. But all of this is going to figure in very importantly to our study of these 144,000 before we're all is said and done.
Do these people know that 700 years after they went into captivity, we have in Scripture representatives told to us from some of those 10 tribes. So they hadn't been lost 700 years later, we know for sure. Do they know that?
Well,
like Asher?
I would say that there's one of two answers. Either, and it's probably some people fit in one camp and some in the other. Either they're just biblically ignorant, and that's 95% of the world out there. They're just biblically ignorant, and they don't know that there are passages that say that at least 700 years later they were there. And the rest of the group would be people who know that and then who are deceptive on purpose. I don't know. I mean, you're in one camp or the other. So.
Or they could say the people mentioned in the New Testament from one of those tribes were just people that were left behind by Assyria. They were descendants of people left behind.
Which is fine. At least we still have some descendants of the 10 tribes.
Right, they're not lost.
They're not lost. That's the whole point. Yeah, you can't hold a boat. So then the third big example, and this is just taking the world by storm, is it's either known by the name Anglo or British Israelism. I think probably most people today know it. I think an older term was Anglo-Britishism or Anglo-Israelism. But British Israelism is what it's better known by today. It is held, it's one of the major tenets of a major religious cult from the 20th century. They're still out there, they're just not as big, and that is the Worldwide Church of God, led by Herbert W. Armstrong. Herbert W. Armstrong and his son, Garner Ted Armstrong, and Herbert's long dead, I think Garner is dead now as well. But Herbert W. Armstrong probably goes back to, I don't know, maybe you have to look it up, the 1930s or 1940s. A religious cult leader. He published, I'm sure they still do today. By the way, their group is called Worldwide Church of God. They publish a magazine, and they probably still do today, that I've always thought was interesting. It's called The Plain Truth. And I've always said it's neither plain nor is it truth. But that's the name of the magazine, is The Plain Truth. And back in the days of radio, before television came along, and we're a long ways past that time now, it was huge to listen to Herbert W. Armstrong or Garner Ted on the radio preach British Israelism. And so here's what British is. This is their own spin, their own take on the 10 lost tribes. But this is definitely the group best known for holding to this theory of the 10 lost tribes. And here's what they would have said. They would have said that the southern kingdom, which did not go into that captivity, was made up of Jews. The Jews were the one present when Jesus came on the scene. They rejected the Messiah, therefore God rejected them. So that anybody that comes from Judah or Benjamin, anyone that you would consider coming from the southern kingdom, they are Christ-rejected apostates. That's their first tenet. They say that the true people of God, and this is just the reverse of the Bible. The Bible has the southern kingdom as the more righteous of the two kingdoms, if any. It lasted a lot longer. And people fled the northern kingdom when some of the idolatry began to happen up there, the pious Israelites, if you carefully read your historical Old Testament books, they left and went to the southern kingdom to get away from all of that. So if anything, the Bible makes the southern kingdom out to be much better than the northern kingdom. Herbert W. Armstrong has that flipped. He's got the southern kingdom is the one that rejected Jesus, and therefore God rejected them. And the northern kingdom is made up of Israelites, and they are the true people of God. So they were way over here in Assyria. The name of this theory is British Israelism. So you know where we're going. We're going in this direction. So here's their theory. And they have written volumes on this. Volumes with what I call pseudo-archaeology, pseudo-anthropology. There is no scientific base for it at all, let alone any biblical base. We're going to obviously spend our time on the biblical side and not all of the historical and genealogical and anthropological side. But there are people who are way more qualified. I'm not qualified to talk about any of that, who are qualified in that area who say this is just nothing but a hoax. You know, this is just a cult leader who came up with a hoax and he got a big following from it. So once they were in Assyria, this theory is that these people, you already know, some people say they migrated to India, to Afghanistan, to all the way down here to Africa. Pick your country of destination. And that's where they migrated to so that you could become them. They migrated through Europe. And along the way, they dropped little hints of their presence, such as this, is that how you spell it? This big river, one of the biggest rivers in Europe, the Danube River, of course, Dan. The tribe of Dan has been there. They have all of these places in Europe that have something somehow connected to the tribes or to Israel, and they think that the river is evidence of an earlier existence of the tribe of Dan making their way through that. I was thinking as I was driving down here to teach tonight, my uncle's name before he died was Dan. And he had red hair and blue eyes. Does that make him a Jew because his name was Dan? How preposterous all of this is. But it gets worse. And they have thought through this, and they think that they're so clever. So we know, probably all of us, do we not, who were the ancestors of the people that settled the British Isles, the Anglo-Saxons, right? And we'll just talk about England, but we could talk about the British Isles. The Anglo-Saxons were the predecessors for the people that lived in the British Isles. Okay, watch this. Let's get rid of this because we don't need that. That doesn't work. And let's get rid of that because that doesn't work. And we got Sax, and I think I see Isaac, the patriarch. I see Isaac in that. That is their claim to fame. They say that the Anglo-Saxons descended, I don't know why Isaac, just because it has nothing to do with the tribes.
That was the only thing
But that's the only thing they could find. But they have descended from Isaac through the 10 lost northern tribes and settled in England. And then they go one step further. Now they're not too much concerned about him anymore. They're more concerned about the two sons of Joseph. And so what they did with that is they said, Joseph had two sons. The firstborn was Manasseh, and the second was Ephraim, but Ephraim was the preferred of the two. That the Ephraimites settled England. I don't know what happened to all the rest of the tribes. They just seemed to conveniently forget about them. And then the Manassites got on the Mayflower and came to America. So that if you're in England, you are descended from Ephraim, and if you're in the United States, you are descended from Manasseh. Yeah, I know. It's hard to wrap your head around some of this stuff. It's a widespread popular theory in one form or the other that 10 tribes were lost. But just remember, if you don't remember anything I've said tonight, remember that every time someone talks about the 10 lost tribes, before they're done with the conversation, they will be letting you know, but they're not really lost. I'm one of them. So when they tell you the 10 lost tribes, say, okay, they're lost. They're gone, forgotten, erased, never to be seen again. And immediately they'll fight back and say, well, actually, that's not true because we are part of the 10 lost tribes. All right, enough of that. That's the only historical stuff I'm going to say about that. There are all kinds of problems with this theory. I'm going to keep it real simple and reduce all of the arguments that I could bring against it to 3. Okay, I'm just going to keep it simple and bring 3 arguments. None from history, none from archaeology, none from geography, because that's not my expertise. You can read on your own if you're interested. I seriously doubt that you are. And you can find professional people who have refuted that theory in those regards. The Bible is my expertise, so I'm going to stay with that. So here are 3 arguments. We're going to make it really simple, although my third one is going to take up all of next week. But I'm still going to keep it simple. But this is going to be educational and helpful for you so you know what's going on with the tribes. So my first argument against it would be our text. If you'll turn back to Revelation chapter 7. I believe this is the Word of God. I believe it is future prophecy. I've said in more ways than I can count why I think that, and I've given plenty of reasons and evidences in the last year and a half for that. That being said, 10 tribes are lost, not according to our text. I wouldn't even have to have anything but this. I have a lot more. I have dozens of passages. But I'm just saying, I don't have to have anything more than this. This is a future reference to something that's going to happen in the tribulation and before the trumpet judgments start, because the commander-in-chief angel clearly said to the other 4, hold the winds back, don't let anything blow, no destruction on the earth until we seal the servants of our God in their forehead. This is a future prophecy that has not been fulfilled because nothing else that we've studied in this book has been fulfilled. And lo and behold, what do we find? Future from our time right now, we find tribes. Whatever you want to do with the names, that makes no difference right now. But you don't have 10 lost. You have 12 that are mentioned right here. And the 12 that are mentioned here are Judah. They'd be okay with that. Reuben. No, he wasn't a part of them.
He was part of the northern kingdom.
Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. So however you want to configure the tribes, and we're going to work on that in more detail later. That's beside the point right now. You have more than 2 tribes, and you have tribes that are from the north. So this text alone, just forget the theory, refutes that whole theory. The second argument, and we're not going to spend long tonight. Next time, be ready to turn a lot in your Bible. For the second argument, you will need this. So let me start, and that is our map of the tribal allotments. You might want to just be looking that over. And the more familiar you are with that, the better able you will be to understand Scripture. And again, let me say, I realize, I'm a huge fan of the Old Testament, but I realize the Old Testament is laborious. It has so much information. And I realize that, and I acknowledge that, and I sympathize with you and me and all of us in trying to read it and understand it. I just do, as a human being. There's a lot in the Old Testament. But it is God's Word. I had another conversation. That was a phone conversation I started this message with today. I sat down and had a conversation with some people, must have been last week, who had wanted to talk about some things. Their daughter arranged a meeting, and they said, why don't we just meet over coffee somewhere? So we did, and I thought we would talk a half hour. 3 hours later, we were finally getting up from the table because our paths had intersected in different regards in the past. But toward the end of that conversation, the lady, it was a husband and wife couple in their 80s, just a delightful, lovely Christian couple. The lady found out that I was teaching in Revelation, and she said, and I could tell she was trying to be diplomatic and polite and non-offensive, which is fine. And we should all try to be that. And she said, oh, that's good. Well, you know, Revelation, it's a book about a lot of stuff in the future. A lot of the stuff's going to happen later on. And I just want to spend my time studying things that are important. And I was wanting to be diplomatic in my response. And so I said, you know what? I agree with you on both points, sister. I totally agree. The first point, it is a book about future events. Your second point, I agree. We should want to spend our time on things that are important. But we should be careful how we define important. If we define important by, I want a verse that's like this long, that has a message in it that will help me get through my work day today. If that's what you mean by important, that's not what God means by important. The Bible and everything in it is so important. This is the way I think. He said, heaven and earth will pass away, but not a jot or a tittle will pass away. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't more and less important things, for sure. You could get lost somewhere in a historical book that this king did that, and then this guy told the other person this, and then she said that, and they said that. Or you could go to Romans and see some great, wonderful Christian doctrine. I'm not saying that there aren't more important and less important things, but it's all important at the end of the day. My point in that little aside was there is so much information in the Old Testament that I don't even know about the 12 tribes that I'm sure is of critical importance. There is so much about the 12 tribes that we don't even, I say I don't know because I haven't devoted the time to study everything about it that I would like to study just because I haven't done it. And I've studied a lot about the Bible. So where does that leave people who haven't studied much about the Bible? They even know less. And I understand that and I appreciate that, and I'm not critical of that at all. Whatever's important to you, you know, will be reflected in your life. It's just the way we are. You know, our priorities aren't given that name for no reason at all. They are a priority because we make them a priority. But here's what I was going to say as we start looking at this list of the tribal allotments. There's not 1 in 10 people in your average Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal, whatever church who knows very much about the tribes. I don't even know the statistics. I don't even know. You'd have to get a group of them together to probably be able to name the 12 tribes. And again, that's not criticism. It's just probably reality. If that's true, I'm going to make another statement. Just think about what I just said. They don't know the 12 tribes. They don't know who they are. And if they know that, that's great. That is the starting point. You know, there they are. That's a starting point. But they don't know anything about the allotments, how they changed, why they were given, who gave them. And they did evolve over time. Moses, before they ever went into the promised land, he divided up what we call Trans or Cisjordan on the eastern side of the river differently than what Joshua did later on. He had his own reasons for doing that. Joshua came along and changed some of those boundaries. You don't know that unless you carefully read the narrative, which is another point, let me say. Because the narrative of the tribes is based on place names in ancient antiquity, a lot of those are lost to people today. So when you see a list like this, I can assure you that it is mostly right. I cannot assure you that it's infallible. It's just this is what most scholars would agree on. But whether one of these boundaries was another quarter mile in this direction or 2 miles in that direction, it would not be possible today without further discoveries in archaeology and excavations, because they're simply names given in the Old Testament that we don't necessarily know how that transcribes to today or where that location is for today. But we know enough that we have this.
Would you say that a lot of the cities on this map don't currently exist with that same name today? I mean, they may still be cities, but they're not called by that name.
That is true.
These are the names given in the Old Testament.
Most of them are nowadays called tell something, because tell, it simply means a mound, and it was an old city that another one that was demolished, people killed or whatever, another city built on top of, another city built on top of, and so forth.
There are obviously some.
So most of them are called a tell something.
There are obviously some exceptions. Jerusalem still goes by that name. Gaza, there still is a Gaza Strip.
Yes, absolutely.
But a lot of these are.
Absolutely. Jericho is still Jericho,
Yeah.
and places like that. Okay, back to what I was trying to say. I'm giving you responses to this is very important, responses to the lost 10 tribes theory. My first response was our text in Revelation 7. My second response is this. I bet there's not one in 1,000, there's not one in 10,000 Christians, church members, that realize where Simeon's territory was. There's not one in 100,000. Right? You think, here's the dividing line. We've got 10 northern tribes. We've got 2 southern tribes. That's what everybody says. Everybody says the 10 tribes, the 2 tribes, the 10 tribes, the 2 tribes, 10, 2, 10, 2, 10, 2, 10, 2. Not one in 10,000. Look at where Simeon is. Simeon, and the basis for this, the historical background, if you want to note this, is Joshua 19, verses 1 to 10. Not one in 10,000 Christians realize Simeon was not given a tribal allotment as those other tribes were. He was simply given a number of cities that fell within the tribal allotment of Judah. That is clearly, unambiguously stated in Joshua 19. Let me just read part of it. And see, if you had not carefully read the tribal information and paying attention to it, then this just escapes you. Because look, guys, I know as we're all reading this, we're tempted to think, what's the point? But always tell yourself, this is what I tell myself, I might not know what the point is, but that doesn't mean there's not one. That's right. We're always saying, what's the point? Because our mind says, what's the point? Just say, I don't know the point, but there is one, and one day I'll figure it out. The second lot came forth to Simeon, even for the tribe of the children of Simeon, according to their families and their inheritance. It was within the inheritance of the children of Judah.
I had that highlighted.
And then in verse 9, out of the portion of the children of Judah was the inheritance of the children of Simeon, for the part of the children of Judah was too much for them. Therefore, the children of Simeon had their inheritance within the inheritance of them. And you could put something else in your mind in the middle of that verse that it doesn't say there, but it says elsewhere. Gives you a reason why. Said that Judah was too large, and that's why Simeon got a part of Judah. It says in other places, Simeon was too small to have his own. It doesn't say that here, but I'll give you some verses where it says Simeon was too small to have his own. Judah was too large to have all of this to himself, so why not put Simeon within Judah? And there are some important cities like Beersheba and Hormath and Ziklag, and you see that list of cities. They aren't boundaries, they're actual cities that are given to the tribe of Simeon. So, what's going on then with the 10 lost tribes? We've got 3 tribes down south, so now you're going to have to say, well, maybe there's 9 lost tribes, because Simeon was down in the southern region. He wasn't in the northern region. But let me just give you a couple of really obscure historical references, and we won't be much longer tonight. First Chronicles, you never turn to First Chronicles for anything. First Chronicles 4. Before we look at that, If you're there, hold your finger there. Go back to Jacob's prophecy in Genesis 49. We've looked at this with regard to Jesus being from the tribe of Judah. This fabulous prophecy given by Jacob, the patriarch, over his sons. This takes up this 49th chapter of Genesis. We've looked a lot at verse 10. But look at, in light of Simeon, look at Genesis 49 and verse 5. Talking about Simeon and Levi are brethren. And then look at verse 7. This is a remarkable prophecy fulfilled in two different ways regarding these two sons, or more to the point, their descendants. Cursed be their anger. You can read earlier in Genesis what that's talking about. For it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel.
That's exactly what happened.
It's exactly what happened with the Levites. Even though it wasn't a curse per se on them, it wasn't really a curse on either one of these brothers, they were not given a tribal allotment either. They were given 46 Levitical cities scattered all around the nation of Israel, northern kingdom and southern kingdom. So this prophecy was fulfilled for the tribe of Levi in that regard. What about the tribe of Simeon? Now you know how that was fulfilled. He also was not given his own place, his own territory, because he was small. He was simply given some cities scattered down in the southern portion of Judah. And Jacob prophesied that by the Holy Spirit, just like a prophet, God put his words in his mouth and he spoke them. Jacob didn't necessarily know what he was saying. He definitely didn't know what the outcome would be of the words that he said.
He lived how many years before those tribal allotments in Joshua?
Oh, hundreds of years prior to that. Yes.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, now look over in 1 Chronicles 1. You have to look at verse 24. We're looking at the descendants of Simeon. 1 Chronicles 4:24. We're looking at the sons of Simeon. Then down in verse 27, and Shimei had 16 sons and 6 daughters, but his brethren had not many children, neither did all their family multiply like the children of Judah. That again is another direct fulfillment of the prophecy of the patriarch, of their father and the patriarch Jacob. Okay. One last thing tonight, because I'm going to start with my third argument against the 10 tribes. This is all I'm going to say tonight. So the first argument was we already have a passage in our study, Revelation 7, rejects this idea of 10 lost tribes because there are 12 tribes still there. Second argument was Simeon wasn't even a part of the northern kingdom. He was down in the southern kingdom. And as I said, not 1 in 10,000 people even know that. My third argument is the one we're going to spend almost all of our time on, and it'll be all of next week, and that is to look at actual texts. Actual, not just where was Simeon and where wasn't he, but actual text. This is the most damaging criticism of this theory, because what these texts will do is this. They will show you the existence of some, if not all, of the 12 tribes long after 722 BC. If we can do that, theory's gone. The whole theory is gone. If we can find biblical references, actual text that post-date 722 BC, that's the number we have to keep in mind. So we can't go and try to find something in 800. That doesn't do you any good. They were all in their land at that time. We've got passages that post-date 722 BC, and we can see some or all of the tribes, then we have a serious problem.
Of course, they could say that, well, no, because they were lost after that, after the BC.
Yeah, but what the whole argument is, they were assimilated into Assyrian culture and just disappeared at that time.
But if we show that there's evidence after that
100 years later, 200 years later, 400 years later.
They're not assimilated very fast as they would like us to believe. Yeah, I see. It seriously undermines
And as we said earlier when we were talking about this, a question you raised, either people don't know their Bible, A, or B, they know it and are deliberately trying to deceive people. So the text I want to close with is in our book, Revelation, chapter 21 and verse 12. Most Bible scholars and believers realize that by the time we get to chapters 21 and 22, we are into an eternal state. This is after the heavens and the earth have been destroyed. As Peter tells us in 2 Peter 3 will happen, the very first verse of this chapter, we see the creation of a new heaven and a new earth and a new city and New Jerusalem descending out of heaven from God to the earth. And then we just have wonderful, incredible teaching of what eternity will be like in the presence of God. And within the construction of this city, it has 12 gates and has 12 foundations. And in the building materials of these gates and of these foundations, we see the Lord's commitment eternally to both his people Israel and his commitment eternally to his church. Because the foundation had the names of the 12 apostles. And the gates of the city in verse 12 had a wall great and high and had 12 gates. And at the gates 12 angels. And names written thereon, that is on the gates, not on the angels, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. Now look, this verse does not prove the existence of the tribes at this time, because it could easily be argued the tribes were lost, they disappeared, and this is just in memoriam to them. I totally get that. This verse doesn't prove it by itself. But if we have other verses, and we will next time, that beyond a shadow of a doubt prove it, then we know, oh yeah, the 12 tribes do still exist. And here they are existing all the way into eternity. So I'm going to close with that.